Good day. My name is John Trahan. I'm a resident of Denver, Colorado. Have lived here since 1973. Went to high school in Denver, Colorado. Graduated with a bachelor's degree from the University of Southern Colorado in 1985. Went on to be an athlete there and help pay for my education. Returned to Denver, Colorado, raised a family. Been giving back to the community for the past 30 years, working with the youth, summer school programs, tutorial programs, programs as a life coach, as well as my family and I created a youth program for track and field for the youth, the Montbello Cheetah Youth Organization that carried on for the past 20 years. I became a high school track and field head coach at Montbello High School in 2008, and then became the head football coach at that same school in 2010. And I've been coaching high school athletics all that time until 2019. I wanted to talk to you about the criminal justice system and my personal experience over the last 3 to 4 years dealing with the criminal justice system. Many of my friends and people that have known me were aware that I had some legal issues going on because of news reports and things that were in the news in 2019 based on being falsely accused of committing a crime. As a life coach, I felt it's very important that I share my information and my background and experience with everyone, because if it's a learning lesson to be had, it is something that each individual can understand and learn from, that is still my goal. But I am now very, very serious about being an outspoken person and advocate for criminal justice reform and holding people accountable, because there are people that are put in very trusted positions to be in charge of the impact and the effect that they can have on other citizens' lives based on their conduct. And we know that sometimes authority and power in the hands of the wrong individual is extremely dangerous. And that brings me to why I'm here sharing this conversation with you here today. In my opinion, the most dangerous and powerful criminal in the state of Colorado is Gary Garcia. Gary Garcia is a criminal investigator for the Colorado Attorney General's office. Gary Garcia was hired by the Colorado Attorney General office in August of 2005, according to the documents we've received from the Colorado Attorney General's office. Investigator Garcia worked there as a financial fraud investigator from 2005 to December 2014. His behavior during the 2014 timeframe began to show he had a desire to be a famous and much more important individual than what he needed to. And this is what we're going to expose of him today. So let's talk about a little bit of his experience. Investigator Gary Garcia was trained to be a securities fraud investigator, a financial fraud investigator. He was trained as an expert to identify, collect, preserve, analyze, and summarize, as well as present physical evidence, which includes complex documents and computerized financial records, such as business records and financial bank statements, to prosecutors and to testify to that information in open court. Mr. Garcia was also trained to conduct interviews and interrogate witnesses and suspects who he had specifically felt were capable or involved with criminal activities related to financial or securities fraud. He was trained how to draft reports that were detailed of his investigation, as well as write affidavits such as arrest affidavits, warrants to search people's homes or offices, draft reports of his interviews with witnesses and suspects, and all type of other correspondence that he had to do for the legal justice system. According to the Colorado Attorney General's office, these were just part of the day-to-day functions that were essential for Mr. Garcia. Now, 5 years into his position as a financial fraud investigator, that's when Garcia began to show signs that he desired to have more attention than just that of being a behind-the-scenes investigator. Garcia understood that a person in his position had a responsibility to the public office he worked with to keep a low profile and not seek out public fame. However, his need to feel important controlled his judgment. He decided to take advantage of an opportunity that was presented to him by a private real estate investment firm that he would have public and yes, global broadcast of his interview. Garcia wanted attention so badly that he decided not to inform nor request the permission from the Colorado Attorney General's office prior to conducting not one, but 2 separate interviews, both for the same investment company that would be broadcast nationally as well as globally. Now, according to the Colorado Attorney General Office records, Investigator Garcia did that in 2010, but on January 2012, he received a written reprimand from the Deputy Attorney General, Michael Doherty, for identifying himself during that interview as an investigator with the Colorado Attorney General's office. He didn't seek permission from the Colorado Attorney General office prior to conducting those interviews. And it is my opinion that he knowingly didn't seek that permission because he was afraid that they would say no, and he would not be able to get the attention that he so desired. Garcia didn't care about the conflict of interest he placed the entire Colorado Attorney General office in by participating in the interviews with that private company. He wanted the attention, and nothing, not even the policies within the Colorado Attorney General's office, would stop him from getting the attention that he desired. Now, according to the documents received from the Colorado Attorney General's office, Investigator Garcia on February 10th of 2014 received a second reprimand from his supervisor, Mr. Durkin, for another inappropriate use of his Colorado Attorney General Office investigator title, but this time in a personal legal matter. Investigator Garcia was well aware of his responsibilities, yet he elected on his own to use the power of his position with the most powerful law enforcement organization in the state of Colorado for his personal belief and his personal gain. Two months after that reprimand, in April of 2014, Investigator Garcia received an evaluation of his performance, a job performance evaluation. That rating that he received was below the standard considered to be a successful performance of his job duties as a staff member of the Colorado Attorney General's office. Garcia explained his rating. Garcia's supervisor explained his rating and said these words: Garcia had cases he was investigating that had languished and not had proper attention paid to them. According to his supervisor, Mr. Clifton, on some occasion, it seems the cause for the cases languishing was due to a lack of attention on some cases and a lack of knowledge of how to proceed with his investigation on other cases. Investigator Garcia's performance was so poor that his investigator, Mr. Clifton, in an attempt to remedy Garcia's poor performance, determined that he would need to micromanage criminal investigator Gary Garcia. He would micromanage him by insisting they have weekly meetings to cover all of his investigations and to help get Mr. Garcia improve in his performance as a criminal investigator. If this man is the man investigating whether you're innocent or guilty and based on that investigation, you sure don't want to be on the back end of his investigation, because even his own supervisor understood that he was not up to par or up to the challenge. Now, as in the case of many employees who are struggling to perform their job duties, Mr. Clifton on April 29th of 2014 placed Gary Garcia on a performance improvement plan, also known as a PIP. Now, part of the plan that was given to Mr. Garcia, it gave specific instructions to Mr. Garcia of how he should exercise better judgment in doing his job. Yes, Mr. Clifton, the supervisor within the Colorado Attorney General's office, questioned the soundness of the professional judgment shown by criminal investigator Garcia. He questioned it to the point he put it in writing. Part of the PIP plan was Mr. Garcia had to have a better understanding of the seriousness of the alleged offenses he was investigating. He was asked that he had to be better with his attention to the time constraints of investigations, such as statutes of limitations for crimes that he was investigating. He didn't want to carry on his investigation beyond the point where if there were people who actually committed a crime, the statute of limitations would pass before he completed his investigation, so they could not be charged with the crime they committed. Another part of his PIP plan was he had to improve with meeting and completing investigatory tasks in the specific order they should be completed in prior to Mr. Garcia moving on to other aspects of his investigation. That tells me that there is a process and a procedures manual that investigators should take step-by-step guidelines to complete a detailed and comprehensive investigation. Obviously, Mr. Garcia, with all his years of experience, had failed to understand how important that was. Mr. Garcia's PIP also specifically stated that Mr. Garcia would ensure that his investigations would not be neglected, and he would ensure attention was paid to them in all of his investigations, obviously showing that he has demonstrated a lack of attention to his investigations prior to being placed on this performance improvement plan. According to the Colorado Attorney General documents that we received, 5 months later, August of 2014, Mr. Garcia's supervisor, Mr. Clifton, provided Gary Garcia with a corrective action because after another 5 months, Mr. Garcia still failed to demonstrate the improvement that was required of him under his personal improvement plan. Now, at this time, Mr. Clifford informed Garcia that he had failed to demonstrate appropriate professional judgment in his duties, and he continued to neglect his cases. The corrective action plan that Mr. Clifton gave to Mr. Garcia specifically said, it is expected that you, Gary Garcia, will demonstrate the care and the attention to the cases as is expected of an experienced criminal investigator level 2 that you are. Now, at this point, it's obvious that Mr. Clifton, Gary Garcia's supervisor, direct supervisor, was clearly frustrated that he had to micromanage Mr. Garcia. In fact, Mr. Clifton wrote in the corrective action that he could not and would not continue to micromanage Mr. Garcia on each of his cases, telling him each detailed step to take to conduct his investigations. Sounds like this investigator was incompetent. That's just my opinion. We'll see what you think as we go on. In November of 2014, Mr. Clifton, after another issue with Gary Garcia, concluded that investigator Garcia had intentionally disregarded his instructions on a case. Mr. Clifton then drafted a 5-page memorandum to Mr. Clifton's supervisor and the head of the financial fraud unit of the Colorado Attorney General Office, detailing Garcia's performance and competency issues. On December 1st, 2014, Mr. Durkin, who is Mr. Clifton's direct supervisor and the person who is in charge of the financial fraud unit of the Colorado Attorney General Office, presented investigator Gary Garcia with a termination letter. Yes, the Colorado Attorney General's office terminated criminal investigator Gary Garcia on December 1st of 2014. In that letter, Mr. Durkin, as I said, the head of the financial fraud unit, concluded, I have determined that your actions constitute a willful failure to perform and a failure to perform at a competent level. Despite significant efforts to help you improve, you have consistently failed to demonstrate appropriate professional judgment in your duties, consistently neglected your cases that prevent criminal prosecutions, and failed to perform at a competent level. Furthermore, termination, Mr. Garcia, is necessary due to your continued failure to take responsibility for your inability to perform at a competent level. I'm not saying that. This is the head of the financial fraud unit for the Colorado Attorney General Office making that statement. Your inability to perform at a competent level is what they felt of Investigator Garcia. Mr. Durkin went on to say that the negative repercussions of his poor performance was unsatisfactory. He said that performance had a major impact on the criminal justice section of the Department of Law and its ability to fulfill its core mission. All of this is in writing. This is the background and the history that Gary Garcia, the person that I'm telling you is the most dangerous and powerful criminal in the state of Colorado. That's his history. Now, because I want to give the totality of the story, Mr. Garcia, after being fired by the Colorado Attorney General Office in 2014, filed an appeal with the Human Resource Office there with the Colorado Attorney General Office. And for the next two years, he fought to get his job back. He filed an appeal and he won his appeal based on the appeal board's belief that Gary Garcia's termination was arbitrary because Garcia, they felt, should have been given more time and more opportunity to improve in his position as a criminal investigator. Now, I'm sorry. How would you feel if this incompetent person that had a lack of attention to the details of his investigation were investigating any of you? How would you feel about that? How would you feel about that individual making a determination as to you being guilty of a crime? Well, I was that person. On appeal, Garcia's termination was reversed and he received full pay for the 2 years that he was terminated from the Colorado Attorney General Office. And then he was reassigned within the Colorado's Attorney General Office in November of 2016. Now, that's an important date. It's an important date because November 2016 was a month prior to Mr. Garcia receiving his first assignment as he returned as a criminal investigator. That first assignment was a dental clinic in Denver, Colorado that was owned and operated by myself. I owned it as an investor, but I did not work at that dental office. We had hired staff and everyone to run the day-to-day operations. But this individual being assigned to that investigation had negative and adverse repercussions for me and my family. And they had those repercussions because, in my opinion, everything that the supervisors of the Colorado Attorney General Office had said regarding Mr. Gary Garcia as a criminal investigator was true. My question is, knowing Mr. Garcia's history, how much direct supervision did Mr. Garcia receive during his Medicaid fraud investigation of the dental clinic that I once owned? Now, as I said, he was assigned that case as soon as he returned to the Colorado Attorney General office as an investigator. He may not have still been in the financial fraud unit because those people understood that he was incompetent. So he was assigned to the Medicaid fraud unit. Now, this was a case which Mr. Garcia made a determination on who he felt was the guilty person within 1 week of serving a search warrant on the dental clinic. This was a month after he got his job back. Gary Garcia, the incompetent, bumbling investigator, on his own accord, determined prior to conducting or completing an investigation that I had to be the guilty person. He said it first to other members of the Colorado Attorney General staff because he said, Mr. Trahan, myself, did not call his office the day that he conducted his search with the search warrant, even though he knew I was not involved in the day-to-day operations, nor was I in Denver, Colorado the day and hadn't got all the information. I actually made a phone call on the very next business day that the dental clinic was open, the following week. They served a search warrant on a Thursday. That Tuesday, I called their office. That wasn't soon enough for Mr. Garcia. He's guilty because he didn't call soon enough. That's what he told other people within the Colorado Attorney General's office. Now, Garcia never spoke to me, even though he was told the day he went there that I was an absentee owner. But Garcia made his determination that I should go to prison because he believed that based on the home that I lived in and the fact that I didn't call his office back soon enough, I had to be living above my means. I'm just going to say it like it is. If I were not a Black man in Denver, Colorado, would any investigator made the same conclusion? It is what it is. Why else would a man who is clearly investigated and understood that I own more than one business make his determination based on I didn't call his office back soon enough and the house I lived in was too nice a house for me to be able to afford? I personally believe that statement would not have been made had I not been a man of color. Garcia flat out didn't like the fact that he thought my home was too nice for me to live in and own. I believe Garcia was motivated in his return to his investigative position with the Colorado's Attorney General office. Why? He wanted to prove to the newly elected Colorado Attorney General, Phil Weiser, and the staff that he was a good criminal investigator and that his termination was in fact a wrongful termination. Garcia, he needed to show the head of the financial fraud unit and his former supervisors that he was better than what they had concluded he was 2 years earlier. Now, unfortunately for me, John Trahan, Investigator Garcia targeted me as his redemptive proving ground, and Garcia was willing to do anything in his power to build a case to convict me of a crime, even if I didn't participate in the crime nor have any knowledge of that crime. The question is, did Gary Garcia and his conduct and investigation of the Denver-based dental clinic reveal him to be the incompetent investigator that Mr. Clifford and Mr. Durkin, his previous supervisors in the Colorado Attorney General's office, explain and document that he was? Or did it show a desperate Gary Garcia, and he was desperately in need of redemption of himself, and that need pushed him to become the criminal who I believe he ultimately is? It's likely that both are true statements. Remember, Gary Garcia was trained to identify, collect, preserve, and analyze complex financial records as a financial fraud investigator. So in this case, he had all of the financial records and statements. He could see where every penny of the funds that flowed through the accounts of that dental business were spent. On one hand, Garcia wants to be viewed as this expert, experienced financial fraud investigator, but on the other hand, he wants everyone to believe that he could not understand the information he had in front of him, which clearly revealed financially how and why the dental clinic office manager was guilty of the crime. The crime was Medicaid fraud. False claim forms were created to be submitted for payment. Once the payment was received, where did the dollars go? According to Gary Garcia, he had all the records, but he didn't pay attention, or he didn't see, or he didn't understand where those funds went. Garcia was told by the dental clinic staff that I, on very few occasions, visited the dental business. He was told that the dental clinic office manager herself controlled the day-to-day operations of that business. Now, having that knowledge after the search warrant for records at the dental clinic was served and completed, Mr. Garcia conducted detailed background checks on myself and all the members of the dental clinic. Mr. Garcia understood that I had never had any legal issues, not even speeding tickets in the state of Colorado. Garcia knew that I had devoted over 30 years of my life working with the children in the Denver community, along with my wife and children. Garcia also knew that I had a background as an athlete in college and beyond, and as a state championship high school track and field and football coach. Garcia knew I owned several businesses and lived a comfortable life with my family in Centennial, Colorado. All these facts are very important for an investigator trying to do a competent and complete job. Gary Garcia also knew that his background checks had revealed the dental clinic office manager had created false documents over a decade earlier to enter the United States illegally. That's an important fact, because after all, this case involved the creation of false documents. But we'll see where that plays out. In addition, Gary Garcia knew that that same office manager had stolen a person's identification, a person who happened to have been a retired police officer, and used that information, social security numbers and things like that, to secure employment, not only at the dental clinic, but also to purchase automobiles and other things based on that social security number. She did that the entire time she was in the United States, from at least 12 to 14 years. Investigator Garcia, the financial fraud investigator, was told by the dental clinic staff, which included that office manager, that 3 of the 5-member staff were related members, all hired by the office manager. Yes, she hired independently her sisters to work as dental assistants, receptionists, and other positions within the dental clinic. Mr. Garcia was told how many days per week the dental clinic was open and what time the clinic operated. Now, as a financial fraud investigator, you would think Mr. Garcia could see the payroll dollars that had been paid out, and he would understand, by being trained to decipher complex financial records, that the amount that was being paid out to the dental clinic staff somehow did not match with the information they were giving him on how many days a week they worked and how many hours of the week they worked. In fact, Investigator Garcia was told by the dental clinic office manager that she and one of her sisters created the dental billing claim forms, and that no one else created them, or no one else even knew how to create them, because they were the ones that were trained how to create those billing claim forms. After being told this and documenting this information in his reports from his interviews with these staff members, Garcia continued to argue to the Colorado Attorney General Office prosecutor that John Trahan, myself, created those forms. He didn't provide any proof nor evidence that I had any knowledge of how to create such forms, but he just made his opinion, and he stood by that opinion and was not going to be moved from that opinion, because he wanted to convict myself. Now, Investigator Garcia completed his investigation after 26 months. Yeah, a little over 2 years. After he completed his investigation, he drafted an affidavit for probable cause, a document that he had to present to either a judge or a grand jury to show the course of his investigation and his conclusion. And did that provide probable cause to arrest myself for the crime of insurance fraud? Now, the problem that Mr. Garcia didn't count on was that his affidavit included false statements that he created and presented to the judge to help the judge or sway the judge into signing the document for the arrest warrant so that he could have me arrested. That information didn't come out until we actually had a trial, because on the witness stand, the Colorado Attorney General Office had called some of these witnesses, which he had completed interviews with, and then he added his own statements attributing those statements to the people that he interviewed. So without the prosecutor's knowledge, they're questioning those individuals based on the report written by Gary Garcia. On the witness stand, those witnesses had to say in open court to the judge and the jury that no, Mr. or Miss Prosecutor, I never made those statements or that statement to Mr. Garcia. Now, once Mr. Garcia secured his arrest warrant, he made the decision about how he wanted me to be arrested. Now, during the trial, we find out that in 2016, I had called his office after the search warrant was served at the dental clinic, and everyone in the Attorney General office considered myself to be a very cooperative witness, because I called, I answered all the questions, I asked what was going on, and I left all of my contact information so that if there was anything else they needed, they knew how to get back in touch with me. I never heard a word from them until 25 months later. Mr. Garcia never reached out to interview me to get any questions answered because he had already made up his mind I was a guilty person. With that being said, Mr. Garcia had my home address, my home telephone number, my business address, my business telephone number, because he had went and taken pictures at my office when no one was there. He knew exactly where my office was. He knew that I was the head football coach at Highlands Ranch High School in Douglas County, Colorado. And so Mr. Garcia had all this information and could have contacted me and said, Mr. Trahan, we have a warrant for your arrest. We would like for you to turn yourself in at a certain period of time. And I'm sure that's what I would have done. But no, Mr. Garcia had something else in mind. Investigator Garcia decided that he wanted to call the friends that he had worked with prior to getting his job at the Colorado Attorney General office, the Douglas County Sheriff's Department. He called them because as a head football coach at a Douglas County high school, Investigator Garcia felt, according to his statement, it was the best place to have myself arrested after a morning workout of the football team at Douglas County High School, at Highlands Ranch High School, a Douglas County school. During the trial, the prosecutor asked Mr. Garcia about how my arrest took place. And he prefaced his statement immediately by saying, well, first of all, let me just say, I didn't want to bring any undue attention or embarrassment to Mr. Trahan or cause him undue pressure with the way we conducted the arrest. But I just thought the high school was the best place to effect the arrest over all the other areas, his home, his business. I could have called him any of those places. He wanted to make sure he put it out that he didn't want to cause undue embarrassment or pressure, or bring undue attention to the arrest, but he just felt that that was the best place to have me arrested. When I was arrested, no one at the Douglas County Sheriff Department could tell me why I was arrested. I asked repeatedly, why am I being arrested? And all they would say is, well, we have a warrant for your arrest, and that's all we could tell you. The very next day, before I could find out any information about why I was arrested, this was the press release that the Colorado Attorney General office had submitted and put in the Denver Post, as well as on several other local media outlets. Television stations carried the story, showing my mug shots. They were showing up at my home, everything. And Mr. Garcia wanted the jury and the court to believe they did not want any extra attention brought to my arrest. Notice they went out of their way to make sure they publicized my arrest and what they were accusing me of doing. However, when the trial took place and there was no evidence that I had done anything wrong or knew anything was even being done wrong, and the jury of 12 people said I was not guilty, there wasn't a single press release, there wasn't a single apology, there wasn't a single statement made by anyone from the Colorado Attorney General office to say we went through the process and Mr. Trahan was found to be not guilty of what we accused him of. I attached the name of the director of communication, their telephone numbers, as well as their email. If it moves any of you to contact them and voice your opinion of how this particular case took place and how they publicize it and then have gone completely silent since, there's the information you need to make that contact. Now, at this point, Mr. Garcia was fully committed to convicting me of a crime I did not commit and have any knowledge of. Investigator Garcia and the prosecutors were told in the winter of 2019, after my arrest, that I was innocent, and our defense investigation had revealed over $400,000 of payroll embezzlement during the same time frame Investigator Garcia accused me of $400,000 of fraud. My defense provided factual payroll reports from the payroll processing company, along with the daily work schedule of the dental clinic that were created by the office manager herself. Those reports were reconciled with the bank records that Investigator Garcia had already had. So he has all this information as a trained expert financial fraud investigator. But he wants you to believe that either those facts are not true, he didn't uncover those facts, because he wanted to make sure that he convicted John Trahan, myself, of a crime I didn't commit. My question is, was Investigator Garcia simply, again, negligent with his investigation in the case, as his previous supervisor said he was 2 years earlier? Was he not paying attention to the details of the investigation as he had been terminated for in 2014? Or did Investigator Garcia uncover this vital information, which clearly provided factually that I did not commit the crime, but then uncovering it, he decided to suppress this information, because nowhere in his affidavit for probable cause for my arrest did he put any of that information in that document. I believe he suppressed that information because he was determined to put myself in prison, because he did not approve of my lifestyle, and he did not want to show at this point in his very first investigation back as a Colorado Attorney General's office investigator, that he was still incompetent. We question what type of supervision was given to Garcia once he had returned to his position as an investigator in the Colorado Attorney General office. Everybody in that office should have known his background and history. Did they take the proper steps to ensure a man with the ability to absolutely impact somebody's life and charge them with a crime was competent in his abilities to investigate the crime? Mr. Garcia has several opportunities to present the facts of the case to the prosecutors and to stop the false prosecution of myself. It is believed that Garcia at the time didn't want to again reveal his poor investigative performance, so he continued to push his opinion to the prosecutors that Trahan is the guilty person in this case. Even when the dental clinic office manager called Mr. Garcia up and emailed him and requested immunity to testify, Mr. Garcia, an experienced criminal investigator, did not consider that that office manager could be guilty. Then, after the office manager admitted to Gary Garcia that she had lied to him during the 2 years of his investigation, that she had stolen files and documents from the dental clinic, Mr. Garcia still did not consider that there was a possibility that that office manager was guilty of fraud. That wasn't enough. The office manager then admitted to investigator Garcia that she had stolen money by falsely reporting work hours on each of the payrolls and having those funds paid directly to her through direct deposit into her account and her sister's bank accounts. Investigator Garcia had all of this knowledge and information, and yet he continued to insist that those weren't the guilty people. I, John Trahan, had to be the guilty person to the prosecutors. Unfortunately for me, the prosecutor was a very young attorney who had just been hired by the Colorado Attorney General office in the fall of 2019. In fact, it was her very first case, and she had followed the recommendation of what she thought was an experienced investigator in Gary Garcia. I believe the prosecutor probably had no knowledge at all about investigator Garcia's past history of employment within the Colorado Attorney General's office. However, it was the prosecutor's job to review the facts of the information of the case and live up to her oath as a prosecutor for the Colorado Attorney General office. And that oath was to seek first justice above all, not just a conviction. The prosecutor and her supervisors turned away from the evidence and continued to force a trial, costing myself and my family huge legal fees and expenses. The history of incompetence of investigator Garcia and the lack of oversight by the Colorado Attorney General office for this case, the state of Colorado versus John Trahan, was a misuse of the judicial system. They were malicious in their prosecution. They were negligent in their review of the facts, and they were negligent in their supervision and oversight of an already proven incompetent and negligent investigator in Investigator Garcia. My name and my good reputation was destroyed by the incompetence and the negligence of Mr. Garcia's investigative case. Myself and my family have suffered financially, having to defend against these false allegations by Gary Garcia. I suffered loss of income as a contractor. I couldn't get contracts because I couldn't pass background exams because my arrests and charges were a public record. I could no longer coach because Mr. Garcia made sure to arrest me at the high school where I was the football coach and to make me look as much of a criminal as he could to ensure that I would lose that position as well. Malicious in their conduct. I had to pay, and I continue to pay, huge legal expenses because the Colorado Attorney General Office, led by Colorado Attorney Phil Weiser, refused to live up to their oath of office and to always seek justice. I've made several formal complaints to the Colorado Attorney General Office since and have not received a single reply from Mr. Weiser or any other member of the Colorado Attorney General's office. I've also made several Colorado open records requests for public information about the investigation in this case to find out what Mr. Garcia actually knew and when he knew it. I even requested investigation policies and procedure manuals so I can find out, did Investigator Garcia follow the steps and the processes that were in their policy and procedures manual? I question that because it was questioned by his supervisors in 2014 when they fired Mr. Garcia for incompetence. The response of the Colorado Attorney General Office to my petition, to my request, is that I have to file a petition, a suit in district courts to get court orders to get that information. I'm finding out now that they're stalling, postponing, and delaying such information because I'm still within that window of opportunity to file a civil suit against the Colorado Attorney General's office for the misconduct, the neglect, the negligence, and the incompetence, and the malicious prosecution of a case that all the evidence showed I should have never been charged with. The most powerful law enforcement organization allowed this person, Mr. Gary Garcia, a person they knew had serious issues performing as a criminal investigator. They allowed him to abuse his position of authority and to victimize me, one of the most outstanding citizens in the state of Colorado. My question is, how many other investigations has Gary Garcia worked on in the past or is presently working on in his role as a criminal investigator for the Colorado Attorney General's office? And how many of those investigations has the Colorado Attorney General office allowed his incompetence to victimize innocent people? How many people are out there that have had to be defend themselves of charges presented and brought to them because of the investigation of Gary Garcia? If you're one of those innocent individuals, please reach out and contact me. J.L. Trahan, spelled Trahan at me.com. I want to follow up and make sure we hold the Colorado Attorney General Office accountable for their conduct, their decisions, and how they hurt innocent individuals. They want to walk away from this case after doing all the damage that they have done, and they expect an innocent person like myself to just accept the fact that they have literally extorted hundreds of thousands of dollars from me and my family, which, in my opinion, Mr. Garcia understood anyway. His conduct has been allowed and covered up by the Colorado Attorney General Office. So yes, I'm John Trahan. I was victimized by the Colorado Attorney General Office investigator Gary Garcia and the entire Colorado Attorney General Office staff, which is led by Phil Weiser. I was accused of a crime I had no knowledge had taken place by Gary Garcia. Mr. Garcia had received all the information he needed to complete a detailed and complete investigation. And he turned away from the facts and allowed his personal biases to determine the outcome of the investigation he conducted and presented that outcome to a judge for my arrest, and then again to a court trying to convict me of a crime which all the facts he had understood I had not committed. Mr. Garcia decided that the facts didn't matter because he did not believe I could accomplish the things in my life and the things in my businesses that were accomplished. Garcia presented false statements to have me arrested and then continue to reject the overwhelming evidence of my innocence as he attempted to convict me of the crime I didn't commit. Now, at the time, I was not aware of Mr. Garcia's employment history and troubles with the Colorado Attorney General's office. I went through a trial where a jury of 12 people found me not guilty of any crimes. They listened to 7 days of the prosecution trying to put on a case where not a single one of the people they put up, nearly 30 people testifying about a crime, and not a single one of them could say I did anything wrong or had any conduct that was remotely criminal in what I did as an owner of a business. The Colorado Attorney General Office has refused to provide any information I've requested, which includes all the Colorado Open Records requests for public records. The conduct and continued actions of the Phil Weiser-led Colorado Attorney General Office has cost me hundreds of thousands of dollars in legal fees and lost income. It's my opinion that they're covering up for their conduct and for the conduct of their investigator and their lack of supervision and their investigators' oversight, who they knew had serious performance issues prior to him being assigned to my case. Please feel free to share this story with your friends over social media, with any and everybody that you can, because the media who were so ready to share my arrest have refused to step forward and share the outcome and the results of this case. Colorado Attorney General Phil Weiser needs to be held accountable for the actions of his office. As I said, several formal complaints I have submitted to their office, starting with January of 2021. I submitted formal complaints to the FBI, to the Colorado Bureau of Investigations. I've submitted complaints to the Denver Police Department. Why? Because the Colorado Attorney General office refuses to go after and charge the actual people that committed the crime in this case. I believe while they said in the trial they weren't given the office manager immunity, their action shows that they did just that. They have not attempted to charge them with the theft that they committed while working at the dental clinic. Then when I go to the Denver Police Department and file the complaint, they tell me there's nothing they can do. Why? Because the Colorado Attorney General's office has jurisdiction over that crime. Again, I will be an advocate now, searching out and holding the judicial system accountable for their actions. I do not want to see any other innocent individuals from any walk of life or any community in the Denver metro area or in the United States of America have to endure the mental anguish, the emotional roller coaster ride, and the financial devastation that is caused by the most dangerous criminal in the state of Colorado, and that's investigator Gary Garcia, because he has the power of the Colorado Attorney General's office supporting him in his conduct. Again, if anyone has been charged with a crime or has had any type of dealings where investigator Gary Garcia was involved with the investigation, please reach out to me at J like John, L like Larry, Trahan, T like Tom, RAHAN @me.com. Reach out to me with your information and how I can get back with you, and we can continue the investigation. This is the first part that I will share with you. In the future, I will share with you the details of the trial that I went through in this particular case so that everybody will have a better understanding. I will also share with you my dealings with what I would consider to be an excellent attorney that defended me and helped prove my innocence. And I will also share with you the information about another defense attorney who, in my mind, was criminal in his behavior that I will be bringing a suit against for stealing funds and not providing the services. So I am now a new watchdog. I am a new person that will be holding the justice system's feet to the fire to do what's right and to do better. When you know better, you must do better. Thank you for your time. I appreciate you. God bless, and good luck in the future.